Noah and Nathan Hale were only 6, but that night their world nearly shattered. In the silence of the mansion, billionaire Jonathan Hale pushed open the door and froze. His twin sons in red sweatshirts clung to Clarissa Moore, the maid he thought he barely knew. A stranger sat bound to a chair, blood on his lip, and Clarissa stood tall with a cast-iron skillet still steaming in her hand. "Daddy, we caught the bad guy," Noah shouted, his voice trembling with triumph. Then came the word that struck Jonathan like a knife. "Mommy helped us." Jonathan's heart stopped. "What did you just call her?" he whispered. Clarissa's dark eyes didn't flinch. "He tried to take them," she said, her voice steady, fierce, unshaken. What no one saw coming was not only the courage in her hands, but the past she had tried to bury. The pain that would soon unravel secrets Jonathan never imagined. From a moment of terror to a bond stronger than blood, this is the story of how betrayal, love, and redemption collide in the most unexpected place. Support us by subscribing and share in the comments. Where are you listening to this story of resilience tonight? The evening in Napa Valley had turned soft and heavy, the air brushed with the sweetness of ripening grapes. Rows of vines climbed the hillsides in orderly green waves, and the horizon bled into orange, copper, and violet as the sun began to dip behind the ridges. A faint breeze came down through the valley and rattled the dry leaves at the edges of the vineyard, carrying with it the scent of dust, oak barrels, and the faint whisper of smoke from chimneys already lit for autumn. The Hale estate sat in the heart of this scene, a sprawling mansion of sandstone and glass, its tall windows reflecting the last blaze of the day. On most evenings, the house would hum with life children's voices tumbling from the great room, a television murmuring from the den, and the quiet rhythms of domesticity. But tonight, when Jonathan Hale returned home earlier than expected, silence pressed against the walls like an unwelcome guest. Jonathan Hale was a man who bore the marks of success and the wear of solitude in equal measure. In his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark blonde hair beginning to silver at the temples, he carried himself with the poise of someone used to commanding boardrooms, but not immune to the weight of loss. His hazel eyes, sharp in public, guarded in private, were ringed with fatigue, the kind that divorce had carved into him over 2 bitter years. He had built his empire on patience and calculated risk, investing in vineyards when others doubted, turning his brand into one of California's most revered labels. Yet, for all the acclaim, Jonathan's true empire was supposed to have been his family. That was what had unraveled when Victoria left, tearing apart not just a marriage, but the rhythm of trust inside the walls of this very house. His goal now, quiet and singular, was to protect what remained, his 6-year-old twin sons. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of his black Tesla as he steered it up the long driveway. Jonathan imagined the usual chaos awaiting him. Cartoons loud enough to echo down the hall, toy cars scattered like mines across the rug, Noah demanding another glass of juice, Nathan asking about the stars he had seen in a picture book. He pictured Clarissa Moore, the housekeeper and nanny, tidying up with her deliberate calm, her presence the invisible thread holding everything together. Clarissa Moore was a woman both striking and unassuming. 34, tall and slender, with skin as dark and luminous as polished mahogany, she moved through the estate with a grace that felt both natural and disciplined. Her hair, a thick halo of coiled curls, was usually tied back under a crisp maid's cap when she worked, but strands often escaped to frame her high cheekbones. Her eyes were deep and steady, carrying a weight that few noticed unless they stared too long, and then they might sense the history pressing behind them. To the twins, she was more than caretaker. She was fortress and comfort, someone who never raised her voice but whose gaze alone commanded both obedience and affection. To Jonathan, she had always been reliable, a presence he respected but never truly knew. He didn't ask about her past, and she never offered. When he stepped through the front door, however, the script broke. The air inside was wrong, too still, too taut. There were no sounds of cartoons, no patter of little feet, no distant hum of a dishwasher. The silence was absolute, and Jonathan's instincts, honed from years of deals and betrayals, flared. He closed the door softly behind him and advanced down the wide hallway with cautious steps. The scene in the living room froze him. Clarissa stood in the center of the room, barefoot on the polished oak floor. Her curls had escaped in wild arcs around her face, her chest rising and falling with sharp breaths. In her right hand she clutched a cast-iron skillet, its surface still glistening faintly with heat. Before her, tied to a chair with one of Jonathan's own leather belts, sat a man in a dark hoodie, his head lolled forward, a bruise swelling at his temple, blood smeared at the corner of his mouth. The belt cut tightly across his arms, securing him with the precision of someone who knew how to restrain. And behind Clarissa, clutching at the hem of her dress, stood the twins. Noah and Nathan Hale were mirror images at first glance, both slight freckle-cheeked boys with sandy brown hair and earnest blue-gray eyes. But where Noah's gaze burned with curiosity, Nathan's carried a softer, cautious watchfulness. Tonight, both wore their matching red sweatshirts, a gift from their father last Christmas, and both had their fists clenched tight at their sides. And yet, Jonathan saw something impossible in their expressions, not terror, but pride. "Daddy!" Noah's voice rang with triumph rather than fear. He pointed to the slumped figure in the chair. "We caught the bad guy!" Then, without hesitation, he added a word that hit Jonathan harder than any boardroom betrayal ever had. "Mommy helped us." The word sliced through him. Mommy. Jonathan's chest tightened, his breath caught. Victoria was many things, his ex-wife, the boy's absent mother, but not this. And Clarissa, with her skillet still raised, didn't so much as flinch at the child's slip. Her eyes, sharp and resolute, locked onto Jonathan's as if she had been waiting for his reaction more than fearing the intruder. Jonathan's mind fought to catch up with what his eyes told him. Clarissa, the dependable housekeeper, had subdued a would-be kidnapper. His sons, alive and unharmed, clung to her as if she were the center of their world. And in the middle of it all was a word mommy that felt like an accusation, a wound, and a possibility all at once. He stepped further into the room, his movements slow, cautious. Not because he feared Clarissa, but because everything he thought he knew about her had fractured in that instant. He crouched to check the unconscious man, pressing 2 fingers to his neck. The pulse was steady, labored but strong. Whoever he was, he wouldn't be escaping. Clarissa finally lowered the skillet, though her grip didn't loosen. Her voice, when it came, was deeper and steadier than Jonathan had ever heard it. "He tried to take them," she said simply, the words vibrating with a cold, protective fury. It wasn't panic, it wasn't fear, it was a vow spoken aloud. For a long beat, silence stretched between them again. Then from outside, the shrill wail of a siren broke through the night-short urgent cutting into the fragile air of the room. The police, summoned by Clarissa before Jonathan had even arrived, were closing in fast. Jonathan glanced back at his sons, their small hands gripping Clarissa's dress, their wide eyes reflecting trust and pride. And for the first time since his divorce, Jonathan Hale felt his careful walls of suspicion bending. As the sirens drew closer, Noah whispered into the stillness, his voice soft but certain. "She saved us, Dad." The words landed like judgment, quiet but absolute, dissolving the last remnants of Jonathan's doubts. The kitchen glowed in muted gold from the overhead lights, the air thick with the scent of chamomile tea steeping in a ceramic pot. Steam curled upward in twisting ribbons, ghostly against the darkened windows. Outside, Napa Valley lay hushed, its vineyard shrouded in the first cool breath of nightfall. But inside the Hale estate, the atmosphere was taut, every word measured, every glance loaded. The living room scene still echoed through Jonathan Hale's chest Clarissa with the skillet, his boys clinging to her, the intruder bound and bloodied. Now, hours later, the police had gone, leaving behind their clipped voices, their notebooks filled with details, and the unsettling truth that no one had yet answered the question, how had the man gotten in? Jonathan sat at the end of the long marble island, shoulders slumped forward, his fingers drumming against the stem of a half-empty wine glass. He was still in his work clothes. A charcoal blazer tossed over the chair, the collar of his white shirt loosened, sleeves rolled back to reveal forearms that carried the tan of the vineyard but also veins raised by tension. His hazel eyes were fixed not on the glass but on the twins, who sat at the breakfast nook with a plate of untouched cookies between them. Noah tapped one against the table absent-mindedly, while Nathan picked at a thread on his red sweatshirt. Both boys, normally bundles of chatter, were silent now, subdued by the residue of fear and confusion. Across the kitchen, Clarissa Moore rinsed the skillet she had wielded hours earlier, her movements deliberate, controlled. She was barefoot still, her long frame bent slightly as she scrubbed the heavy cast iron clean. Her high cheekbones glistened faintly with sweat, her dark curls damp from the heat of both the confrontation and the aftermath. To any outsider, she might have seemed composed, efficient, but Jonathan noticed the subtle tremor in her wrist, the way she exhaled too slowly as if steadying herself with every breath. The silence was broken by the arrival of Detective Samuel Harker, a man who carried the look of someone born into long nights. He was in his early 50s, a broad-shouldered figure with a weathered face marked by lines that years in the field had carved into him. His salt-and-pepper hair was clipped close, and his dark suit hung slightly loose, betraying a frame that had once been more muscular. Harker's eyes were gray, steady, and patient, the kind of gaze that absorbed details without judgment. He had served 15 years in San Francisco before relocating to Napa, seeking quieter crimes but finding none less serious. A failed marriage had left him wary of people's promises, and it showed in his clipped, pragmatic tone. "The cameras were disabled," Harker said, setting his notepad down. His voice was deep, carrying a rasp from too many cigarettes. "Not destroyed, not damaged, disabled. That takes someone who knows your system." Jonathan leaned back, his jaw tightening. "Which means someone inside." Harker didn't nod, didn't deny. He only scribbled something in his pad, then closed it with a snap. "We'll trace the breach. For now, keep the house secure, limit access. Until we know who we're dealing with, trust sparingly." His eyes flicked briefly to Clarissa before he left the room. Clarissa dried her hands slowly, then placed the skillet back on its hook. She could feel Jonathan's gaze on her, heavy as a stone. For a moment, she wondered if he was silently asking the same question as the detective. She had been the one to save the boys, yet she could see the shadow of suspicion in his eyes. Later that night, when the children had been put to bed, Nathan finally asleep with his thumb pressed against his cheek, Noah dreaming restlessly, murmuring words she couldn't quite catch. Clarissa retreated to the pantry to collect linens. It was there, tucked under the edge of a drawer, that she found it. A scrap of paper, folded twice, the handwriting neat and cold. "You really think you can hide forever?" Clarissa froze, the note crinkling in her hand. Her chest constricted as though invisible hands had tightened around her ribs. She glanced toward the door, half expecting someone to appear, but the pantry was empty, the only sound the faint tick of the refrigerator. She unfolded the note again, reading the words until the lines blurred. They weren't random. They weren't idle. They were meant for her. Her mind flew back to New Orleans, to rain-slick streets and the memory of her younger brother Caleb, vanishing into the grasp of a gang she had screamed at the world to see. No one had believed her then, not the neighbors, not the police, not even her mother who told her she was imagining monsters where none existed. By the time the truth emerged, it was too late. That night had written itself into her marrow, a vow carved as deep as bone that she would never let another child be taken again. The note in her hand was a blade slicing open scars she had thought healed. But Clarissa did not show it. She folded the paper again and slipped it into her apron pocket. She would not tell Jonathan, not yet. Without evidence, without proof, her words would only add to the cloud of suspicion already circling. For now, silence was armor. Jonathan, meanwhile, sat in his study. The large oak desk was littered with files, invoices, and a thick binder of staff rosters and delivery schedules. His vineyard empire employed dozens, but only a handful had regular access to the estate. He ran his finger down the list. eyes narrowing on each name. Groundskeepers, delivery drivers, domestic staff, any of them could have known the codes, the routines, and yet he couldn't ignore the cruel irony. The one person he should trust. Clarissa was also the one who had been closest when the threat materialized. Gratitude warred with suspicion, a seesaw that left him unsettled. As he worked, a knock at the study door broke his concentration. It was Martha Gray, the live-in cook. She was in her late 50s, plump and rosy-cheeked, with graying hair tied back under a kerchief. Martha had worked for the family since before the twins were born, a steady hand in the kitchen and a warm voice that often soothed the boys. She wrung her hands nervously as she spoke. "Mr. Hale, I don't mean to intrude, but there's talk among the staff. Some are saying maybe Miss Moore knows more than she lets on." Jonathan's face hardened. "Clarissa saved my son's lives." "Yes," Martha said softly, eyes darting away. "But sometimes the ones who save are the ones who know danger best." With that cryptic remark, she retreated, leaving the door ajar. The weight of her words clung to Jonathan like smoke. He poured himself another glass of wine, his mind circling back to the intruder's cryptic warning. Hours later, Detective Harker's preliminary report landed in his inbox. The message was brief but chilling. The suspect confessed to being paid. Order was clear. Take the boys before their father learns the truth. Jonathan stared at the screen, the words searing into him. Before their father learns the truth. What truth? His empire was built on disclosures, audits, numbers laid bare. Yet somewhere, hidden in shadows, was a secret someone wanted shielded so badly they had tried to steal his children. Upstairs, Clarissa sat on the edge of her narrow bed, the folded note still in her pocket. She pressed her palm against it as if by holding it close she could keep its menace contained. She thought of Caleb, of the rain, of the voices that had ignored her. And she thought of Noah and Nathan, their small faces turned toward her with trust. No, she would not let the past replay itself. But she also knew Jonathan's eyes on her had changed. Gratitude and doubt tangled together, and she had no defense but silence. Down the hall, in the dim light of the twins' bedroom, Noah stirred. His whisper carried across the room a half-dreamed plea. "Don't let them take us, Mommy." Clarissa, hearing it from the doorway, closed her eyes. She did not correct him. She only promised herself no one would. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the hills of Napa, a secret waited, its shadow stretching closer to the Hale family with every breath. The stone steps down to the cellar echoed beneath Jonathan Hale's polished shoes as he carried a lantern into the dark belly of the estate. The night above Napa Valley had cooled into a velvet quiet, the vineyards slumbering under a pale moon. But here, underground, the air was colder still. Damp stone walls exhaled the scent of centuries, mingling oak, dust, and time into something both comforting and ominous. The cellar had always been Jonathan's sanctuary, a place where bottles bore witness to years of labor and victories, their labels a ledger of his life's ambition. Tonight, however, the cellar was not sanctuary. It was evidence. Jonathan placed the lantern on a barrel and pulled a folder from under his arm. Inside were system logs and shipment invoices, printed out by the estate's IT consultant. One entry in particular glared back at him, an unauthorized login, using the credentials of a long-deactivated account. Whoever had slipped into the estate system had known where to dig. It wasn't random and it wasn't luck. They had used an old key, something only an insider or someone with insider ties could possess. He traced the invoices, highlighting irregular shipments, cases of wine redirected, supplies ordered under names he did not recognize, payments funneled through shell vendors. The network tangled in his mind like the vines outside, twisting and overlapping until it was hard to tell where root ended and branch began. And threaded through it all was a quiet fear that the target wasn't just his business, but his children, his family name, even his right to keep the life he had built. A sound behind him made him turn. It was Edgar Finch, the estate's bookkeeper, a wiry man in his 60s with spectacles perched on a long nose and fingers perpetually ink-stained. Edgar had worked with Jonathan's father before him, a man of quiet loyalty, though years of loss had given him the stoop of someone always bracing for disappointment. His hair was thin and gray, his eyes a watery blue that could still glint with sharpness when numbers came into play. "You're burning midnight oil again, Mr. Hale," Edgar said softly, his voice dry like parchment. He adjusted his spectacles, peering at the spread of papers. "This login you're staring at, it wasn't sloppy. Whoever did it wanted you to find the breadcrumbs. That's the oldest trick in the book when someone wants to frame a fall guy." Jonathan exhaled slowly. "And who's the fall guy this time, Edgar?" "Clarissa?" Edgar hesitated, pursed his lips. "People talk. They always will. But you've got to decide who benefits from the noise. That's where truth usually hides." He patted the papers, then withdrew into the shadows of the stairwell. Above ground, in the quiet of the small guest house near the orchard, Clarissa Moore knelt at the foot of a grave marked by a simple stone. The grave wasn't here in Napa, but in her memory. She visited it whenever the weight of silence pressed too hard. Her brother Caleb had been just 4 when he disappeared into the hands of men who traded children like currency. The lavender she laid in her memory was fresh tonight, plucked from the estate garden, its fragrance rising like forgiveness she could never grant. Clarissa was tall, strong, her posture rigid even when she bowed her head. Her hands, though elegant, bore the faint scars of work and survival, reminders that she had taught herself to turn everyday objects into weapons if needed. She could scan a room in seconds, mark exits, identify threats. These instincts, once a survival mechanism, had saved Noah and Nathan last night, and yet the same skills made others whisper, how did she know what to do unless she was involved? Back in the main house, those whispers had begun to grow louder. Martha Gray, the cook, now spoke more cautiously around Clarissa, her once kind tone now threaded with doubt. The groundskeeper, Lionel, a heavy-set man with sunburned skin and a habit of drinking too much after hours, muttered to the delivery drivers that the maid knows too much. Gossip was wildfire, and Clarissa could feel the smoke curling around her no matter how silently she moved through the halls. Jonathan sensed it too. Gratitude for Clarissa's courage wrestled against the thorn of suspicion planted by others. As he pored over the invoices again, his phone buzzed. It was Detective Samuel Harker. The gravel of his voice hummed through the receiver. "We pulled data off the suspect's phone. You'll want to see this." An hour later, Jonathan sat in his study with the detective's file open before him. Inside were screenshots of recovered messages. One stood out, a simple instruction: deliver the boys. I'll handle the rest. Attached to it was a digital receipt, an encrypted transfer routed through layers of anonymity. But at the bottom, like a scar that couldn't be erased, sat a banking watermark. Jonathan froze as he recognized it. The symbol of the Hale Family Trust, an account once overseen by Victoria Hale, his ex-wife. His chest tightened, anger and disbelief colliding. Victoria had left him, left the children, left this life. But the thought that she might have reached into the shadows to orchestrate such a violation twisted his gut. He clenched the paper until his knuckles whitened. Meanwhile, Clarissa moved quietly through the corridors that night, pausing at the twins' bedroom door. Inside, Noah and Nathan slept tangled in blankets, their identical red sweatshirts folded neatly at the foot of their beds. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. She remembered the lavender, the grave, the vow she had made to Caleb and to herself. No child would be lost on her watch again, yet even as she stood guard, she could hear the murmurs below, the estate staff doubting her. She knew silence could protect, but silence could also condemn. She would have to choose carefully when and how to reveal what she had found, the letter, the memories, the truth. Down in the cellar, Jonathan remained with his lantern, the papers spread wide. He was no longer reading numbers. He was reading betrayal. And when he saw the watermark again, he whispered the name aloud like it was a curse. Victoria. The echo of her name lingered in the cold stone vault, a specter of the past now threatening his son's future. The morning mist had only just lifted from the vineyards when the Hale estate began to buzz with an unusual kind of unrest. Outside the gates, reporters had gathered, their cars lined along the narrow country road, long lenses pointed like rifles at the house that sat perched against the hillside. The great room, normally bathed in calm, overlooking rows of golden vines, now felt like a stage. Its tall windows framed a landscape too serene for the storm about to unfold within. Jonathan Hale stood near the fireplace, his blazer draped over one arm, tie knotted but pulled askew. His hazel eyes, sharp but shadowed by nights of sleepless vigilance, flicked toward the front doors as the echo of heels on marble approached. His jaw tightened when the doors opened, and Victoria Hale stepped into the room. Victoria was a woman who had once charmed entire charity galas with little more than a smile, but time and bitterness had etched sharper lines into her beauty. In her early 40s, tall and slender with platinum blonde hair swept into a rigid chignon, she wore a slate-gray skirt suit that seemed pressed with military precision. Her steel blue eyes were cool, her lips painted the shade of a ripe cherry but curving into a smile that sliced thinner than a blade. She had been raised in a wealthy Boston family that demanded perfection in all things, and the result was a woman who wielded control the way others wielded kindness. The scandal of her divorce from Jonathan had hardened her further. She was a creature who thrived on appearances, unwilling to accept that her empire had collapsed around her. At her side walked Graham Lorenz, her attorney, a man in his 50s, lean as a whip with a narrow face and slicked-back silver hair. Graham had built his reputation on corporate takeovers and custody battles. His tailored navy suit whispered money, his wire-rimmed glasses perched on the bridge of a nose that always seemed to angle downward at those around him. He was known for his ruthless efficiency. Clients admired him. Opponents despised him. A failed marriage and estranged daughter had left him cynical, believing affection was always transactional. Victoria wasted no time. She set a leather folder on the polished coffee table with a deliberate thud. "Jonathan," she said smoothly, her voice honeyed but cutting, "I'm here for what's mine. The boys." She slid a document forward, the legal motion gleaming under the sunlight. "Temporary custody. The environment here is unsafe." Her smile widened, brittle. "I'm doing what's best for our children." The words fell with the weight of shattered glass. Jonathan's fists clenched at his sides. "Best? You abandoned them." His voice rose, echoing against the vaulted ceiling. "You walked away." Clarissa Moore stood quietly in the corner, her maid's uniform crisp, her tall frame poised but tense. Her deep-set eyes, usually so calm, flickered as they followed Victoria's every move. She had seen women like Victoria before, draped in wealth, speaking in tones that demanded obedience. But Clarissa also knew the boys upstairs, knew the way Nathan still checked the locks before bed, the way Noah called her mommy when sleep blurred the line between need and memory. Those truths could not be argued on paper, yet here was Victoria, wielding legal words like weapons. As Graham Lorenz began his polished speech about endangerment and the inability of current guardianship to ensure safety, Clarissa excused herself to the kitchen. There she found Martha Gray, the cook, wiping down counters. Martha's rosy cheeks were pinched, her gray hair damp from steam. When Clarissa reached for a cloth to clean spilled milk, Martha muttered, not meeting her eyes, "Maybe this is why you stayed so close." A big payout. The words stung sharper than any blade. Clarissa said nothing. She bent down, wiped the milk from the tiles, and straightened again. Silence had been her shield before, and it remained so now. To her, the only dialogue that mattered was the steady breath of Noah and Nathan when they slept unafraid. Back in the great room, the confrontation escalated. Graham laid out his trump card, a copy of Nathan's old medical file, pages spread like accusations across the coffee table. "Your son had an untreated fever last winter," Graham said with mock concern. "Negligence in this household is already documented. Add to that an intruder waltzing into the estate. This environment is beyond unsafe." Jonathan's face flushed with fury. That fever was treated within hours, and you know it." His voice cracked under the weight of rage and fear. He looked to Victoria, his ex-wife's eyes glittering with triumph, her cherry-red lips curling into satisfaction. The room fell into silence thick enough to choke. Then Clarissa stepped forward from the doorway, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "I have something you should hear." She reached into her apron and withdrew her phone. She pressed play. The recording filled the air, tinny but unmistakable. A male voice, the kidnapper's. "Deliver the boys. She'll handle the rest." Then another voice, clipped, feminine, unmistakable. "A woman of the Hale family will make sure you're paid." The words hung in the air like smoke, curling into every corner of the room. Jonathan's breath caught, his gaze snapping to Victoria. Her smile faltered, her jaw stiffening as her attorney shifted uncomfortably beside her. Outside the windows, the press continued to wait, cameras aimed at the estate. Inside, silence stretched like a wire pulled to breaking. For the first time in years, Victoria's mask cracked, the edges of her composure fraying. Jonathan stepped closer to her, his voice low and lethal. "You brought this into my house. You put our children in danger." Clarissa held the phone tighter, her knuckles white, her heart hammering in her chest. She had revealed her card, the one piece of proof she had clung to like a lifeline. She knew she had shifted the battlefield, but she also knew the war was far from over. The courthouse in Napa County was an austere building, its facade lined with tall columns, the steps worn smooth by decades of disputes and verdicts. On this autumn morning, the sun poured through high windows, catching on the varnished oak that paneled the courtroom walls. The scent of polish mingled with the faint must of old paper, and every sound shoes against the floor, whispers between attorneys. The gavel's echo seemed to hang longer in the air. For Jonathan Hale, seated at the defendant's table, it was less a chamber of justice than an arena. He sat tall, his suit immaculate, but the lines bracketing his mouth betrayed fatigue. His hazel eyes carried a sharpness that had unsettled competitors in boardrooms. But this battle was unlike any merger or acquisition. This was for his sons. Across the aisle, Victoria Hale radiated cold poise. Her platinum hair was perfectly arranged, her slate suit cut to flatter, her pearl earrings glinting under the fluorescent lights. She projected the aura of a mother wronged, of dignity under siege. Yet her steel blue eyes flickered with something harder: defiance, calculation. At her side was Graham Lorenz, his silver hair and lean frame giving him the appearance of a man carved from wire. His voice, when he whispered in Victoria's ear, was soft, but his gaze toward Jonathan was predatory, like a hawk waiting for the falter of a step. Presiding over the case was Judge Eleanor Whitcomb, a woman in her early 60s whose presence filled the chamber more surely than any gavel. Tall and commanding, with a square jaw softened by faint laugh lines, she wore her black robe with ease, as though it were part of her skin. Her hair, silver gray and neatly cropped, framed a pair of piercing brown eyes that missed nothing. Known across the county for her impartiality and blunt honesty, Whitcomb had once raised 3 children on her own after losing her husband young, and that experience lent her a certain steel when it came to family cases. She was respected, even feared, for her intolerance of theatrics. The proceedings began with the slow rhythm of testimony. Detective Samuel Harker presented his findings, his gravelly voice describing the trail of digital transfers. He stood straight, broad-shouldered in a rumpled gray suit, the faint scent of tobacco clinging to him. "Funds were routed through multiple accounts," he said, his eyes steady on the judge. "But the originating source was a family trust previously overseen by Mrs. Victoria Hale." He set down a stack of papers, his fingers lingering for emphasis. "We believe these funds paid the man arrested in the Hale estate." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Victoria's lips tightened, but she did not speak. Graham Lorenz rose, his voice silken. "Your Honor, with respect, financial trails can be manipulated. My client cannot be held responsible for the misuse of a trust long abandoned." His eyes glinted as he glanced toward the gallery, aware of reporters scribbling every word. Jonathan could feel the tension coil in his chest. He wanted to shout, to stand and accuse, but he forced himself still. His mind replayed the memory of his son's small bodies pressed against Clarissa as she held the skillet, of Noah whispering, "She saved us." The truth mattered more than his anger. Clarissa Moore was called next. She stepped forward, tall and poised in a simple navy dress, her dark curls tied back, her hands clasped tightly to steady the faint tremor in her fingers. She looked nothing like the image of a suspect whispered among staff. She looked like what she was, a woman who had stood between danger and two frightened children. Her voice was clear, carrying across the chamber. "I heard him say he was promised payment. He mentioned a woman from the Hale family would take care of it." She held up her phone. The recording cued. The tinny voices filled the room once more. The silence after was absolute. Victoria sat frozen, her smile brittle, her jaw locked. Her attorney placed a hand on her arm, urging composure, but her silence spoke louder than any denial. Judge Whitcomb leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Mrs. Hale, do you wish to respond?" Victoria's lips parted, but no words came. Her silence stretched, long and unbearable, until it felt like the entire room inhaled and forgot how to exhale. In that silence, Jonathan rose. He did not look at Victoria. He looked at the gallery, at the reporters, at the judge. His voice was steady, resolute. "I choose the safety of my children over appearances. Whatever pride, whatever reputation I must lose, I will lose it gladly. But I will not lose them." The gavel struck once, sharp. Judge Whitcomb's tone was clipped. "The court finds sufficient cause to suspend Mrs. Hale's custodial privileges. Until further notice, the children will remain under Mr. Hale's care. Additionally, the court orders psychological evaluations for both minors and a full assessment of their living environment." The room erupted into murmurs, reporters scribbling frantically. Victoria's face flushed red, her composure fractured. Graham leaned in to whisper urgently, but she turned away, eyes fixed on Jonathan with a mixture of fury and disbelief. After the session adjourned, the courthouse steps became a storm of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Jonathan shielded Noah and Nathan with his arms, ushering them toward the car. Clarissa, walking beside them, ignored the clicking shutters. She focused only on the boys, on keeping their eyes turned forward. Later, in the quiet of the courthouse courtyard where a small fountain trickled, Clarissa sat on a stone bench with the twins. The sun was dipping, staining the sky with copper and rose. She pointed upward, where the first stars pierced the dusk. "Do you know why stars stay together?" she asked softly. Noah leaned against her arm, Nathan curled close. "Because they know they are stronger when they're near each other." Noah rested his head on her shoulder, and Nathan reached for her hand, his small fingers gripping her wrist with a quiet desperation. In that moment, the noise of the trial, the shouts of the press, all seemed to vanish. What remained was something fragile and new, a family forming not by blood or law, but by choice and love. As Jonathan approached, he paused, watching the scene. He carried a folder still heavy with evidence, his mind weary from the day's war. Yet when he saw Noah hand Clarissa a drawing three figures under a crooked sun, the words "my family" scrawled in uneven letters, his chest tightened. He had always avoided that word, had always kept the fortress of his heart barred. But now, looking at the sketch, at Clarissa's quiet smile and his son's trust, he felt the walls shift. For the first time, he did not turn away. The first light of dawn spread slowly over the rolling hills of Napa Valley, spilling soft silver across the vineyards. A thin mist clung to the vines, wrapping them in veils of white, and droplets of dew glittered like scattered diamonds on every leaf. In the estate's back garden, the old brick grill released the warm scent of waffles, cinnamon, and butter, drifting lazily through the morning air. The house behind them, once a place of fractured silences and whispered suspicions, now seemed to breathe again. Jonathan Hale stood at the edge of the garden, his tall frame silhouetted against the vines. He wore a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled, his hazel eyes softened by the light. There was a looseness to his posture that had been absent for years, a man no longer carrying his burden alone. For Jonathan, the crisis had been a storm, but storms pass, and in their wake the world looked sharper, truer. He had chosen his path now. The safety of his sons, the truth of their small family, no matter what his reputation paid in exchange. Inside, the twins darted back and forth, their red sweatshirts rumpled from sleep, their hair sticking up in unruly tufts. Noah carried a stuffed toy lion with one ear missing, his energetic legs barely slowing as he skipped across the floor. Nathan moved more carefully, always glancing back to check that Clarissa followed. Their laughter spilled into the garden, thin but growing stronger, like the sun itself. Clarissa Moore stepped into the yard behind them, her tall figure wrapped in a soft cardigan, her curls loose and damp from an early shower. Her dark skin caught the faint shimmer of dew in the air, and though her posture remained disciplined, her face betrayed a gentleness rarely seen by anyone outside this house. She carried a framed photograph. The three of them, Jonathan, Noah, Nathan, smiling in front of the vineyard with Clarissa standing just slightly apart. Today, she intended to hang it on the refrigerator, not as a decoration but as a quiet claim. Before she did, she slipped her hand into her pocket and drew out a thin chain. Hanging from it was a small, scratched pendant, the last belonging of her brother Caleb. Next to it now dangled a small clay heart, misshapen but precious, molded by Noah during an art lesson. She held both together, the cold metal and the soft clay, and exhaled. Grief never left. It softened only when it found a place to rest. At mid-morning, Jonathan invited a small group of reporters past the gates. The press had gathered outside for days, their headlines eager to feast on scandal, betrayal, and courtroom drama. But what they found instead was Jonathan standing beneath the vines, his sons clinging to his hands, and Clarissa just behind him. He offered no speech, no theatrics, no carefully crafted narrative. When the questions tumbled forward, he answered only once. "The woman who saved my sons and saved me is Clarissa Moore." His words were quiet, but the simplicity struck harder than any flourish. The reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, but Jonathan turned away, guiding the children back toward the garden. He had no interest in turning survival into spectacle. That evening, the house filled with the soft rhythm of family life. In the dining room, laughter punctuated clinks of forks. The boys argued cheerfully over who got the last waffle. Jonathan listened, smiling faintly before he leaned forward and asked, "How about a promise? Not just for today, for always. The three of us." He glanced at Clarissa, then back to his sons. "We tell the truth. We listen, and we never leave each other." Noah's eyes sparkled as he agreed quickly, while Nathan looked thoughtful before nodding with quiet determination. Clarissa said nothing at first, only nodding as her throat tightened with emotion. Later, as twilight stretched its purple veil across the hills, Jonathan walked the vineyard path with his sons and Clarissa. The rows of vines swayed in the wind, whispering secrets of seasons long past. Nathan tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad," he asked, his small voice carrying into the evening hush, "can Clarissa stay forever?" The question rang louder than the church bells in the valley. Jonathan stopped, his hazel eyes searching Clarissa's. For a heartbeat, time seemed to suspend the mist curling through the vines. The boys' faces turned upward. Clarissa's steady gaze braced for refusal. But Jonathan did not answer with speeches or rings, not with vows shouted to the world. He crouched, pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, and handed it to her. It was a scrap, written in uneven letters by the boys, "Certificate of Home." Below, two childish signatures marked Noah and Nathan's names. The O's turned into smiley faces. Beneath them was one empty line. Clarissa pressed her hand to her mouth. Her eyes burned as she looked at Jonathan, then at the boys. Slowly, she took a pen from Jonathan's hand and signed her name. She didn't need to speak. Her smile, trembling and radiant, was answer enough. The twins cheered, their red sweatshirts bright against the fading light. Clarissa bent to hug them both, her arms around their small shoulders, clutching the paper against her chest. Jonathan watched, the tension of years dissolving into the cool night air. On the hill, the wind moved through the vines, carrying their laughter outward, a language older than fear, truer than words, the sound of belonging. Every story is more than words on a page. This one reminds us that family is not only about blood or paperwork, but about the people who choose to stay, to protect, and to love us when storms come. In everyday life, we also face doubts, betrayals, and moments when fear could win. Yet even in those times, love, truth, and loyalty can turn silence into belonging. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it with a friend who might need encouragement. Leave a comment about what it meant to you, and subscribe to this channel for more stories of hope and healing. May God bless every one of you watching, and may your homes be filled with safety, laughter, and peace. If you believe in the power of love and protection, type Amen in the comments.